just been talking to Sarah about storms in Washington, D.C., because I'm interested. I'm going out for the inauguration. I want to know if it's still snowy. But, oh, my goodness, a storm has come to Mar-a-Lago, to normally sunny Florida, in the shape of a press conference that Donald Trump has held, which will be of huge interest to Americans, but really a lot of interest and perhaps a lot of concern as well to those territories and nations and their populations that surround the United States.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even ran. I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up because we need it for national security. That's for the free world. I'm talking about protecting the free world.
Are you also considering military force to annex and acquire Canada?
No. Economic force. Because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like, and it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada. So we're going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which has a beautiful ring that covers a lot of territory. The Gulf of America, what a beautiful name.
So what are we supposed to make of that? And of course, what are people who are in any of these countries supposed to make of that? If you're in Canada, in Greenland, in Panama, how do you read these threats or warnings from Donald Trump? That's what we're going to get into. Welcome to Americast.
Americast from BBC News.
Hello there, it's Sarah here. I'm in the BBC's Washington Bureau.
And it's Anthony. I'm at home, still snowy Washington, across the river in Arlington.
And it's Justin in the worldwide headquarters of Americast in London, England.
Anthony, Justin, let me tell you what my working day was like yesterday, because I fear it's a glimpse into what every day for the next 4 years is going to be like. I was busy putting together a TV report about the changes at Meta, a really, really interesting story about what the Facebook owner is doing with content moderation there. And I had half an ear across this press conference that Donald Trump was doing, just in case he said anything about the Meta changes, and I would include that in my report. But as I was listening, it started to get weirder and weirder. I mean, this was a press conference that was billed as being about Dubai investment in US data centers. So, you know, it didn't sound like it was going to be very big news. And then he just went on and on about Greenland, about the Panama Canal, about Canada, even about whales being killed by wind farms. It was astonishing. And it just shows you can never assume Donald Trump's not going to make some news.
I don't know about astonishing at this point, Sarah. I think we saw 4 years of this when Donald Trump was president before. He'll hold a news conference, and then it will totally go off the rails. This is Donald Trump's MO, and he's leaning into it. I don't know if you saw on social media, he posted a picture of North America, including Canada, with all of it having an American flag over it. He seems to say these things off the cuff, and then once he does, he notes the reaction from his audience, and he celebrates it.
But we talked about this before. It's P.T. Barnum, isn't it? It's circus time. And it's all that P.T. Barnum was. So P.T. Barnum, when he set up circuses, there's an element of reality in what's happening, but also, he had an enslaved woman who he claimed was linked to George Washington, who he used to display. And when she died, he had an autopsy, and everyone knew she wasn't anything to do with George Robert Washington, and she wasn't 160 odd years old as he claimed she was. But there was a lot of interest generated, and it's all this kind of madness, maelstrom of stuff that's true. And let's face it, previous American presidents have tried to buy Greenland. Harry Truman had a go after the Second World War. And stuff that is just kind of crazy. I think it's highly unlikely that the United States does take over Canada for all sorts of reasons, some of which we might go into in a bit of time. And it's that mix of stuff that we have discussed before that is... It's a thing with Donald Trump, but it's also, frankly, I think it's part of his appeal. I think it was part of his appeal during the election period. And who knows, maybe the American people will get heartily sick of it. But at the moment, there's something almost slightly comforting about it, I find, because you don't need to take any of it too seriously. But suddenly, as you say, Sarah, suddenly there's something in it that has actually made news and might lead to something.
Yeah, so not only does it mean that journalists like me have to pivot from doing one story and quickly start covering another, I think it's not all chaff, Justin. Of course, it's entertaining, and that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump supporters love him so much. But in amongst all of that P.T. Barnum distraction, in amongst all the glittery, sparkly pieces that catch your eye, there's a core of intent at the heart of it. And our job for the next 4 years, and certainly over the next half hour or so, is to try and work out what he really means when he says these things that sound so outlandish.
Yeah. Can I kick us off, Anthony, with Greenland? Because, as I say, there have been various efforts, haven't there, in the past to buy Greenland. Greenland was a Danish colony for a long time. It's not exactly a colony now. It's kind of slightly self-governing, isn't it? But the idea that it might be subsumed into the United States in some way, shape or form isn't a new one. And exactly as Sarah says, there is an element of seriousness to this, underlined by the fact, and we should listen, shouldn't we, to Donald Trump Jr., who went to Greenland, who flew there in advance of this news conference on Trump Force One and said this.
We're a little pressed for time because we only have a couple hours of daylight, so we got to see everything, but we're really excited to be here.
One question.
Thank you guys so much.
Could you tell why you're in Greenland?
Just here as tourists, seeing it, looks like an incredible place. We've been talking about going for a while. I was actually supposed to be here last spring for some of the stuff I do in my free time, but just really excited to be here. Awesome country. The scenery coming in was just spectacular. So just very excited to be here.
He's just coming to have a look. It was like it was a property viewing, or a real estate purchasing trip, Trump style. It's what it seemed to be. Fly in with the branded plane so that everybody can see that, there's some seriousness behind what Donald Trump's saying. Have a look at the place, see what you think it might be worth. Do you want to make an offer?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things there. One, Justin did mention Harry Truman in the 1950s looked at buying Greenland. I think another president right after the Civil War in the late 1860s considered it. And the United States does have a history of purchasing vast stretches of land from foreign nations. The United States bought Alaska, of course. Actually, the United States bought the Louisiana Purchase, so almost half of the current continental United States was bought from France under Thomas Jefferson in the early 19th century. I think we bought a little strip of land at the bottom of Arizona so that we could build our railways a little straighter. That also happened, I think, late 19th, early 20th century. So it's not outlandish to think about, but these sorts of things haven't happened in a very long time. And the way Donald Trump is going about doing it, browbeating essentially Denmark into entertaining the notion, a U.S. NATO ally, and not ruling out the use of military coercion in order to get it is, that part is what's astounding.
And he was talking, wasn't he, about an economic war essentially against Denmark if they refused to cough up or allow Greenland to be bought. I mean, it occurs to me that there's one obvious thing that comes from Denmark to the United States in quite a large volume at the moment, and that is the drug Wegovy. Which is made by the Danish company Novo Nordisk. I don't know actually where it's made and whether they have plants in the United States or whatever. But so if you're thinking of Danish imports to America, maybe a little bit of bacon, but mainly actually that drug that a lot of Americans will find themselves quite interested in continuing to take. So it's this kind of sign, isn't it, of the complications of these things once you begin to get beyond the press conference and into the nitty-gritty of policy.
A few years back, I was down in Austin, Texas for South by Southwest, and the Danish government was doing a kind of a tourism promotion event there where they had a bunch of journalists come for dinner and they served all this Danish food, this kind of raw, natural Danish food, and they touted about how Denmark was the happiest place on earth and the people were the happiest on earth. But if you look at the response from the monarch, the king of Denmark, he's not happy right now. He doesn't like this saber rattling, and he actually changed his coat of arms. I don't know if you saw this, but he changed the royal coat of arms to have the representation of Greenland, which was a polar bear, much, much bigger on that coat of arms now than it was previously. So I think he is trying to send maybe a not too happy message to the Americans.
Yeah, and the Danish Prime Minister herself said very clearly yesterday Greenland is for Greenlanders and that the island is not for sale. But
what's What's up?
Hi, Jira. We brought you here today to let you know that we made the business decision to switch to ClickUp. Your performance has been decreasing over the last few quarters. There's no innovation, no new features, poor customer support, and there have been several complaints for years.
But you know, I just have my way of operating.
I know, and we really appreciate everything that you've done, but we just can't be productive with you on the team.
But
And we gave consideration to the fee hikes, but then there was the server issue, and now you're telling us that you don't have the speed to work with our new projects, and we can't proceed.
come on. It's not that bad.
Well, we need more features, and you charge us for add-ons. Our non-dev team wants to work in a different way, and yet you force everyone to comply with your way only. Yes, and when we want to share data in a new way, you just flat out refuse. And when we want to integrate new tools, you pack up your stuff and you go home. Yeah, so frankly, your replacement, ClickUp, just handles our workload more easily and can do way more.
Look, I tried explaining all this in my last update.
I know, okay, it's enough. Also, how many times have we caught you sleeping on the job?
It's not technically sleep. I'm closing my eyes for a few seconds so I can think about my workflow.
Okay, well, I think we're done here. You can go. Thank you so much.
Bring your epics, stories, and sprints to ClickUp. Free forever.
Take all of your add-ons with you.
There's just so many back there.
Anthony, Justin, let's try and drill down to what we think is really going on here. So it seems to me that when Donald Trump wants to take control of something, his natural instinct is to try and buy it and do a real estate deal, which is probably not practical here for all the reasons that we've discussed. But, that's where his instinct takes him. What it tells us is that he is really, really concerned about the strategic location of Greenland because it sits pretty much between America and Russia. It's an important shipping route that Russian and Chinese vessels use, and it will become more and more important as the ice recedes and it's easier to take large ships through the Arctic. So he can see that trade, as well as security, is hugely important in that area. And that's not to mention, of course, the critical minerals that there are under the ground in Greenland that might be accessible when the ice recedes as well. But I think that this is just an opening position in a negotiation, which probably would never result in America buying Greenland. But maybe he wants some better guarantees about an American Air Force base that there is there. Maybe he wants to put more American personnel there in order to man these shipping routes, or he wants the Danish or the Greenlanders to do something else about these shipping routes. So instead of doing what other countries might do, which is go and have some closed-door conversations and say, hey, Greenland, we would quite like to do this, this, and this, and this. What would we have to give you in return? He just says, no, I'm going to buy you, and if you don't like it, I'll use military coercion to take it over, so give me for free what it is that I actually want.
And the other thing he was talking about using was tariffs to punish Greenland. And Justin mentioned this. He said very high tariffs. So, we had conversations in the past about what Donald Trump's trade policy might end up looking like and whether the tariffs that he's talked about, and he promised across-the-board tariffs on the campaign trail, whether they're, in actuality it was going to be more what Scott Bessent and his Treasury Secretary and other advisors have said, which is tariffs are a tool to get what America wants. And in this case, tariffs could be a tool to punish Denmark and to convince them to go to the negotiating table and talk about a deal for Greenland. That still seems, rather unlikely. But the fact that Donald Trump is talking about how he would go about doing this and using this kind of coercive force, economic and possibly military, on a U.S. NATO ally, a European ally, a member of the European Union, that is what's particularly jarring about all of this.
Yeah, we ought to talk about the Panama Canal, oughtn't we? Which, in a sense, is a more serious and potentially a shorter term issue because, and again, it's one of those things that's slightly complicated because at first flush, you think that's mad talk. The Panama Canal belongs to Panama and has done for quite a few decades now. So what's he going to do? Is he going to invade? But of course, when you look into it a bit more, Anthony, yes, the canal is not owned by the United States, but if you look at the original treaty, I think there are clauses, aren't there, where the US can intervene if the neutrality of the canal is threatened. And Trump's point, it seems to me, is about China, isn't it, rather than about Panama. It's about the potential threat of Chinese influence in the area, and there is certainly Chinese influence in Panama and around the canal as well. So it's kind of half of it just feels completely off the wall, but half of it, exactly as I suppose we've all been saying, is actually pretty deadly serious as well.
And then there's concern about Chinese influence around the world, and it's something that the Biden administration has been dealing with. You talk about what the U.S. policy towards Africa and the African nations are. A lot of that is meant to counter Chinese influence, Chinese attempts to corner the market on these rare earth minerals, another tie to Greenland, these vital ingredients to batteries and cell phones and all the technological components that are going to make up everyday life for the rest of our lives. Also South America, also Central America. And obviously the canal is a vital economic waterway. The concern about China having soldiers there, Panama denies it. There's been no independently reported evidence that the Chinese military is somehow taking over the canal. And also I think the concerns that China would shut down the canal in the case of a war seem kind of overblown. They would be shutting down their own economic lifeline as well as ours. But I think the as you mentioned, the bigger idea that there is just some kind of a great powers rivalry where we're competing around the world for influence and access, I think that is very much real.
So influence and access, Anthony, that's a really interesting way of putting it, because that's traditionally the way that governments and the US government would go about making friends and currying favors. I think what we heard from Donald Trump yesterday was a worldview that shows you he thinks about it quite differently. He thinks America is the most powerful country in the world, and it can bully other countries into doing things, not cajole them in any way. That he doesn't want access, he wants control. And if he has the power to get that, that's what he will go out and do by whatever means necessary. He thinks that economics and trade is the most important thing in the world. I mean, he's not interested in territorial expansion for the sheer sake of it. And we know he's not interested in military intervention to prop up human rights, say, or protect the sovereignty of some other democracy somewhere else in the world. But he is telling us trade's what matters to him. America needs to be the king. He will do what it takes to put America's interests first without even beginning to argue it's in favor of the rest of the world as well. And he will use the power of American might to get what he wants. I think that was the message yesterday.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, people in other countries can say what they like, and they have been saying what they like. For instance, the president of Panama saying that there's nothing to talk about when it comes to the canal, no possibility of opening any kind of conversation around this reality which has cost the country blood, sweat and tears. But actually, exactly as you say, when it comes to it, and I suppose we should turn to Canada as well, and the idea that the United States might eat up Canada during the Trump presidency as well, which feels outlandish. But then exactly as you say, Sarah, when you look at the relative economic clout, and Canada has lost ground vis-a-vis the US since the pandemic, GDP per person has the gap between the two in GDP per person, national wealth per person has increased. In other words, Canada has not been as successful as the US since the pandemic. You know, not to say that Canadians don't love being Canadian and don't want to maintain their Canadianness and their separateness from the United States. But when it comes to raw economic power, there is something happening south of that border that doesn't seem to happen north of it. And there are ways in which Donald Trump can reach out, particularly given that Canada has an election coming this year, and there are going to be those on the other side in Canada, those who are opponents of Justin Trudeau, who's stepping away, who are very much of the kind of Trump ilk. And, you know, he has this ability, doesn't he, to get under the skin of people in other countries, to roil other countries. We're seeing it in the UK at the moment with Elon Musk. So the kind of whole sense of the Trump administration being a force for a kind of new jaggedness in world affairs is not just between nations, but also inside nations as well. And it wouldn't surprise me at all. Would it surprise you guys if he does cause quite a stir during Canada's election year?
Well, look at what it was that was the final straw that led Justin Trudeau to have to resign. It was Donald Trump's threat of 25% tariffs on goods coming in from Canada and a row between the Prime Minister and his Finance Minister about how to handle that. And Chrystia Freeland, the Finance Minister, thought that Justin Trudeau should have stood up firmer to Donald Trump and his America First economic nationalism. And it was the row between them and her resignation that finally pushed Justin Trudeau out the door. So he's already involved in Canadian politics. And given that, the pictures he was putting on social media that Anthony referred to earlier, maps of the United States plus Canada with the stars and stripes all over. I mean, that was just a troll, I presume. But, he'll have thought it was absolutely hilarious, even if much of Canada didn't.
And Trump and Trudeau have some history. They clashed during Trump's first term in office. There was that famous handshake where no one seemed to want to let go, and they were squeezing harder and harder. And then tweets and social media posts back and forth when they had a summit meeting in Canada. So I think Donald Trump wanted to dunk on Trudeau and was happy to do it, but. He also clearly has eyes on Canadian politics. And I think, Sarah, you hit on something that is a key component of Donald Trump's foreign policy, which is saying the quiet part out loud, talking about how the United States has the power, exposing that power dynamic when it comes to other countries and capitalizing on it. Now, the Canadian conversation seems unlikely in the extreme, but Donald Trump has had eyes on Greenland. He talked about it in his first term. And when he was announcing his U.S. ambassador to Denmark last year in December, he said, again, in that press release, that one of the tasks of this ambassador to Denmark would be to arrange the purchase of Greenland. And now he's bringing it up again. So, this isn't just idle talk, I think, at least when it comes to Greenland. This is something that Donald Trump really is interested in and is going to keep coming up and keep pushing. It's not just something he said off the cuff at a press conference yesterday.
He said something really fascinating when he was talking about Canada, about the trade deficit. So America buys more goods from Canada than the other way around. So America has a several billion-dollar trade deficit with Canada. That obviously drives Donald Trump mad because he was talking about how the US subsidizes Canada to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. Now, that's not at all true. It just so happens that Americans want to buy Canadian stuff more than Canadians want to buy American stuff. But, that's obviously got up his nose. That's something he wants to sort out, I think.
Yeah. And the other thing about Canada that I think is worth mentioning is there's this sort of snootiness thing as well. Canadians regard themselves, or some Canadians regard themselves, as rather superior to Americans, don't they? There used to be this fantastic, actually, it was a really good program, TV program in Canada, where they went round America asking Americans what they knew about Canada. Did you ever see this, either of you?
No.
They'd go and they'd hold kind of mock interviews. So they'd go to, I don't know, Alabama or somewhere, and they'd get a load of Americans together and they'd say, hey, we're from Canada. And the Americans would be friendly, as Americans are to foreigners, and say, oh, that's nice. Where's Canada? And they say, well, it's to the north of you, so things like that. And then there's one particularly sticks in my mind where they said, in Canada, we have our parliament is made of ice. They said, we have an ice parliament. And these people, I can't remember exactly which state it was, but it's somewhere in the south. These people sort of went along with it and said, oh, gosh, that's fascinating. How amazing. We didn't know that about Canada. So the whole shtick of the program was Americans don't know anything at all about Canada, and we Canadians are rather superior because we do know about America and we know about the rest of the world too, and you don't. And I do think that sort of plays into the politics of Donald Trump, Anthony, doesn't it? That there's, this kind of sense that they are, as we used to think of ourselves in the UK, the Greeks to your Romans. In other words, we're the clever ones, the thinky ones, and you're the kind of brawn. And there is that there's that constant underlying tension, it always seemed to me, in the relationship between the US and Canada.